It has been a long, long journey, builders. We have either played or spoken about every single early era nation except one. The biggest one, the Legion in the Room, Ermor, New Faith. This is one of the pivotal nations in Dominion's lore. Much of early age kind of centers around Ermor and its interactions with its neighbors. What happens to Ermor at the end of this era sets up the entirety of Middle Era, and frankly, still has ripple effects all the way into the Late Era. So let's find out more about Ermor, the New Faith. Ermor is an empire centered around a great city. For centuries, it has grown and become more and more influential. Traders and travelers from near and far come to the city. By military campaigns, diplomacy, and trade, Ermor has become a power to be reckoned with. By adopting local traditions and beliefs, the Ermorians posed little threat to their neighbors and conquered peoples. But this has begun to change. A new god is rising. Old synergistic faiths and spirit worship were banned by a prophet dressed in white shrouds. The remnants of his body and shrouds are buried in the holy city of Eldergate, where the adherents of a new faith are waiting the arrival of the reawakening God foreseen by the prophet. The all-encompassing old state cult of the Numias has still survived, but the pontificates and Flamen are slowly adopting the new faith. I think, as you can see here, this is a Rome analogy. It is a powerhouse of a nation in the early era. For national features, we are humans, and we actually do have a Lizardman auxiliary. Our military is human legionaries and Lizardman auxiliaries. For magic, we are strong in fire and death. We have some astral, some water, some earth, some air, and some nature. It should be noted that these last 5 are pretty low. We are mainly centered around fire and death. We have priests that are powerful all the way up to a recruitable Holy 3. And we have recruitable Holy 2s, and some of our sacreds can heal afflictions, both as the healer trait and having recuperation. For scales and blesses, we have an order limit of +1. For buildings, we have advanced forts. In the early era, that translates to we are able to build castles. And we start with a fortified city, which is actually slightly better than a castle. Overall, this looks kind of sort of plain. It isn't. It translates into quite a powerhouse of a nation. As for sites, we only have one. We have the Temple of the Shroud, and it gives us our recruitable sacred and our 2 cap only units, along with 3 fire and 3 astral. Kind of the old and new faith here represented in our gems. Units and sacreds. We have a pretty good selection of troops as Ermor. A couple of these are kind of redundant, but for the most part, these are pretty darn usable. Starting with the lowly slinger, we do not have archers. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of slingers, even in the early era where hats are apparently optional, but we do have the ability to do pretty high fire. So if you want to do flaming arrows, that makes these much, much better. That's definitely a saving grace for people using slings. Other than that, they are dirt cheap. 7 gold, 2 resources, 3 recruitment. These would be an okay choice to cram into a fort that you think is going to be under siege in the near future. I think as long as you have some front line, it's probably better to at least throw the stones than just have more dudes clumped up at the front of the castle if you don't already have magic support to help clear out attackers. Next up, we have the Asinisus. This is an interesting unit. It is a replacement for a militia unit. So 8 gold, 9 resources, 5 recruitment makes it relatively cheap, and it's pretty well equipped for a militia unit, having a spear and 2 javelins. We are wearing a hat, an okay hat, a little bit of armor, and we have a tower shield. Now, we are still a militia. We only have 8 morale, but look at these stats. These are not terrible for a militia unit. I don't think I would ever really want these, but they're better than a regular militia unit at least. Next up, we have two very special units. These are not unique. Other nations do use these throughout the ages. However, they're really, really good. First up, we have the Rhetarius. These and the gladiators we will look at next are gladiator type units. So they are paid to fight, and they will fight for one battle. If they either take a hit or they do damage, I believe. I don't even think they have to get a kill. I think if they take a hit or do damage, then they have earned their freedom, essentially, and they're gone. So your first inclination might be, oh, well, that's kind of crappy. However, for 10 gold, 1 resource, and 9 recruitment points, you get a guy here that has a net and a length 3 trident that stabs for 22 piercing damage. He's wearing a scale mail cuirass and a hoplite helmet for 1 resource. That is ridiculous value. And in the early expansion, if you're not using some like super heavy troop or some sort of sacred expansion, you're going to have attrition anyways, frankly. So these guys will probably do something for that 10 gold, whereas let's say like a medium infantry troop may not actually accomplish anything. You're not going to be dragging around any of these guys that have afflictions, even though we could heal that, but they will just peace out, so you don't have to worry about that. These are really good. 11 attack is fine. 22 piercing damage is nice for doing giant kills, cavalry kills. Because they have a net, that high defense units, glamour units, these guys are pretty versatile for that. There's an entire strategy around just using the gladiator type units to expand because they are that efficient. Very, very nice to have. They're a good emergency thing that you can pull out if needed. Very, very powerful here. Lower defense than our other troops, but that's because we're not using a shield. A lot of the defense on our other troops will have shield calculated into it. Really good morale, actually. Not bad at all. I very much like these guys. If you need to deal with high defense or something you need to hit really, really hard, great choice here. Second one is the Gladiator. He is armored the same way. He costs the same amount. He has the same morale, and I believe his stats are the same. Let me check that. Yeah, 12, 12, 11, 12. 12, 12, 11, 9. So his defense skill is a little lower. However, he has switched out the trident for a two-handed flail. If you don't know about flails, they get a +2 attack versus shielded units. And this one in particular, because it's the two-handed variety, has 2 attacks on it. That's quite interesting. It's a length 2, so you could be repelled. However, if they're not spear units, you don't have to worry about that. If they're shielded, the extra 2 attack is great for getting through that. And because they have 2 attacks, that means 3 of these dudes in a square have 6 attacks going out. These are very damaging units. Now, unfortunately, it is blunt damage, and it's only 18. But if you're not up against giants or something else, 18 blunt damage is perfectly fine. Somewhere in my mind, I have this thought that, like, oh, flails hit the head extra, but I don't think that's a mechanic here. I think the +2 attack versus shield kind of represents them being able to get past defenses. If somebody knows otherwise, let me know. Either way, both of these gladiator troops are very, very good. Some people swear by these for expansion. They're also a great deterrent against getting rushed because you could throw like 500 gold of these out and they will be way more valuable than the enemy's 500 gold that they are going to smash into. Next up, we have the Levy. These are like light-ish infantry, like they are a step up from militia units. They do have 10 morale. They are equipped basically the same. We've got a spear, 2 javelins, a leather cuirass, a legionary bronze helmet, and a shield. Note they have shield, not tower shield. But even then, pretty darn nice here. Human troop, human stats, very usable. I think you'd be surprised by how well they do. Next up, we have the Rorius. I like these a lot more than the Levy. So 10, 8, 9 for the Levy. For the Rorius, we have 10, 13, 8. So a few more resources. What do you get? We have the Lorcia Hamata. Probably mispronouncing that. It's a different type of body armor. And we have moved up to a tower shield. So tower shield, 16 protection, -2 defense, 7 parry. Comparing that to a normal shield, 16 protection, -1 defense, but only 4 parry. That extra parry is really nice. So if the difference for somebody between they would hit you if you didn't have the shield, and they won't hit you if you do have the shield, that means you get hit in the shield, which basically adds a body hit. I believe it's always body hit protection along with the protection of the shield. So in this guy's case, he has 16 protection and his actual body protection is 10. So he has 26 protection when he parries an attack. That's an exceedingly heavy troop. Like, that's enough protection for a solo expanding monster, just to put that into perspective. Really, really nice. They're still human sized, so you get 3 of them to a square, so you don't get too overwhelmed. Now, their attack's nothing to write home about at 10 attack and 13 piercing damage, but that's fine, you know, if you're fighting other human troops, etc., etc. These guys are pretty good line holders. They do have javelins, and Ermor has a lot of javelins, so you generally will hit that critical mass that you need to make a javelin toss effective. If you have like 10 dudes throw javelins, that usually doesn't do much. If you have 100 dudes throw javelins, you're going to get some casualties on most things. So these work pretty decently. Next up, we have that Lizardman Auxiliary. Not very good, unfortunately. So combat speed is 9. If we look at some of our other troops, it's about the same. 9, 8. That guy's kind of a weird exception. 9. So it's not that he's slow particularly, but he is cold-blooded. So you do have to worry about your temperature scales. He has 11 attack and 15 damage. If we look at our cheaper guy here, 10 and 13. So he's slightly better on that, but it's because he has a different weapon. He's using the short sword, which is the same as this troop. So keep that in mind while we're comparing him. Why would you ever want these? Well, maybe you could do something with swimming, but the problem is we don't have a leader who swims, so that's not really gonna help. I guess you could summon something in, maybe? They do have 11 magic resistance compared to a normal human's 10, so that's something. But their morale's 9. They're not slaves or anything. We don't have anything special to give them extra morale. I'm not a huge fan of these, unfortunately. I think they're cool. I like the thematics of that, but not particularly useful. They are wearing a ringmail cuirass, which protection-wise, with their natural protection, gives them a 12, which is actually a little bit better than a lot of our troops. That's something. Next up, we have the Hostatus. The Hostatus is similar to the Lizardman in that he's using a short sword. Otherwise, he is a relatively trained human troop. So 11 protection on the body is the same as the last human we looked at. 10 magic protection. We got up to 11 morale now. 15 defense. That's pretty notable. Like 15 defense is getting up there. Now again, nope, some of that is part of the shield parry. So current defense and parry skill is 15 in total. But still, the tower shield's a great shield. Pretty nice. The short sword is length 1, but you do go up to 11 attack. So that can be relatively nice if you need it. Oftentimes, when you move to swords, you're getting rid of javelins. These guys did not do that. So if the reason you thought you wanted to use these was to stay in better formation, that's not really going to change things here because they still have the javelins. I think if you don't need the repel checks or you do need the slightly higher attack, that's when you'd want to move up to these guys. Overall, pretty solid troop. Again, I think you'll be surprised how well these troops actually do. Next up, we have the Principe. This is our elite sword infantry, and pretty darn good troop, in all honesty. So 14 gold, 16 resources, 20 recruitment. Compared to the previous guy, 11, 14, 12. So you definitely are going to get a few less of these. The cost increase is a little bit noticeable. However, these are quite well trained. We're up to a 12 morale. We're up to a 12 attack with our short sword for the same damage. Otherwise, we are, I believe, even equipped the same. Yeah, equipped the same. However, you're paying for the morale. You're paying for the extra attack. You're paying for 1 extra HP, which, I mean, I'd rather have 1 more HP than 1 less. So I suppose that's something. We're up to 16 defense. That's pretty darn good. These are a pretty good troop, but they do come at that premium. I tend to find I stick on these guys perhaps too long. 11 protection here versus the 13 over here. So, yeah, I don't know. I do like these guys. You do have to be able to pay for them, though. But luckily enough, I think that Ermor can afford it. We have pretty good scales, and we do build castles, so we're pretty good at getting troops out. Next up, we have the Terrarius. A very cool unit. I love Terrarii, but these ones come in at old age, and that really hurts. The map move is noticeable on the penalty there. They do have extra HP because like these are like your veteran soldiers. You know, beware the old man in a occupation where men die young. They do have a length 4 spear, so you can get good repels on things. I do think these are usable. I don't think they're garbage or anything, but do note the low damage. So I think what these are best for is if you're fighting something that can be countered well with repels, that's where these guys are going to stand out the best, because they still have the same attack. Your damage doesn't matter for repels, you just deal 1 damage. But we've moved up to the formation fighter, which means we can have 4 of these guys in a square. That's going to be pretty hard for things that are getting repelled to chew through. We've also moved up to a plate halberd. So if you look over here, 18 protection, and it's a true 18. That is a heavy, heavy troop. Now, you're still a human chassis, but between the repels and that much armor, against like chaff type units, these guys will hold out forever. They also have the really good morale. Now, their biggest weakness beyond the old age is encumbrance. They are going to poop out pretty quick. Once you hit 20 fatigue, you start taking penalties, and these guys will get there in 3 rounds. So just be aware of that. But if all you need to do is hold out for a hot minute, these guys could probably do that for you. Next up, we have the standard bearer. It's a standard bearer. He does have a tower shield, which actually does help. A lot of times these type of units don't have a shield, and that really is to their detriment. So we have a short sword. We're okay with it. We've got the 10 morale, but I believe his standard applies to himself, so he's really 11. I like these guys. Mixing like 1 to 10, 1 to 20 in with your other infantry, totally worth it. Just why not get that extra free morale and keep your guys around longer? I quite like these guys. Next up, we have Equite. Equite are our normal non-sacred cavalry. They do have an actual lance. They use a light lance, so they get that first hit, and then they switch over to a broadsword. That's not bad, actually. That's pretty good. That's definitely better than just having a spear in your hand. They are let down, like most cavalry, by their horse. We only use light scale barding, and light scale barding has no head protection, and it is only 10 on the body. So, unfortunately for our horses, no head protection. Yeah, we end up, well, I guess 3 because we have some natural protection, but still, not great here. 12 bodies, okay, that's fine. If it was 12 on the head also, this would be great. The rider himself is pretty decent. He has 11 attack, he has 16 damage, and he does first a piercing attack on the charge, and then he switches over to slashing. He's using a normal shield, not a tower shield. You can't use a tower shield and ride a horse. Wearing our legionary gear, essentially. He's pretty good. This is okay. If you don't go with a big bless, I think these are better than your sacreds just based on cost. The sacred's 50% more gold for basically the same chassis. Definitely usable. Because we are good at grindy combat and we have javelins, I think the standard Ermorian tactic would be you move forward, you throw your javelins while these guys try to flank rear or even flank the flanks. Sometimes your infantry, while pretty good at holding, aren't the killiest of troops. And so you have a nice held line. These guys come in and they overwhelm a flank and they just roll the flank. And it works quite well on that. If you are going to go with a blessing, though, we have Equite of the Sacred Shroud. Okay, I'm going to start with the problem. The problem is light scale barding. And I feel like if you don't solve that, don't use this unit. Don't think that you're going to get away with like, oh, I'm going to take a bunch of attack and blood surge and yada, yada, yada. The horse will just die. You will have horrible attrition on these guys. If you're going to use them, you have to do something to address their survivability. If you choose to do that, though, this is pretty decent. The mount is sacred, and importantly, the mount has recuperation, so you're not going to have crippled and limping horses making your rider worthless because they can never get to a fight. The rider themselves, the equite of the Seir, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that one, is very similar to the horse. He is sacred, he has recuperation, he's a skill rider 1. Pretty good. Just like I was saying on the previous guy, we have a light lance and then we switch over to a broadsword. Note that we have 13 attack and 14 piercing, and then when we go to the sword, 17 slashing damage. That is very respectable for a human troop. That's quite respectable. Now, you do pay for these stats, though. 60 gold, 29 resources, 48 recruitment points. But we have I believe it's a fortified town or fortified city. I'll show it when we look at the game behind us here, but it's better than a castle slightly. So these are cap only, so you'll be able to afford them in your cap if you want to. I think if you can address the survivability issue, these are all right. These are all right. They say down here, they are among the most respected cavalry units in the world of men. I guess I agree. I do wish that they would just give the horse a little hat. Just a little horsey hat. He would be so much better off. That all being said, I do like these guys. The combat speed's great. They're really good flankers. They have really good morale. You have to make morale checks as you pass units when you're attacking rear. And when you fail that check, you attack the unit closest to you. So you want a nice high morale so that you can ignore other targets and get back to the squishies in the back. And if they make it there, they are going to chop up those troops. Even bodyguards will not hold up well to this kind of attack. Giants in the back, we can hurt them. I mean, 17 is not bad. Not bad at all. Slicing damage or slash damage is also good against damaging shields. So if you're fighting things that have shields, you might be able to actually break the shield, which makes him easier to hit and provides less protection. So pretty usable unit here, I would definitely say. Heroes, commanders, and prophets. For heroes, we have a couple in here. We have the Pontifex Maximus. He's fine. I mean, he's old age. He's a Holy 3. We have recruitable Holy 3s. He's Astral 2. We have other Astrals. He's Fire 2. We can get Fire 2. He doesn't really bring a ton here that other things don't have. I kind of wish that he had, like, Disease Healer or Healer at least. But whatever. He's a free mage if you get him. He's fine. You can use him. Next up, we have the Promate. This is a Holy 4 priest, which is really notable that if you were to make this guy your prophet, he would go up to Holy 5. And at Holy 5, there's a spell you can cast that raises everyone else's Holy level by 1 on the battlefield. So your Holy 3s would go to 4s, and importantly, your 2s would go to 3s. So if you're doing banishes or something, that makes them very, very good at doing that. Otherwise, he is sacred himself. He has recuperation, he's old age, and he's healer too. So having recuperation and healer helps him a lot for not dying while being old age. They'll linger around a lot more than most other units that when they get old age. Finally, we have Gladiatrix. This is like an Enkidu lady who they captured and made fight as a gladiator, and they kind of like tricked her and screwed her over, and she's got a slave collar on. She's bodyguard 2. She's feeble-minded because of the slave collar. There's not much to say here. I mean, it's really cool and flavorful. I don't know if I get her. I think I'll make her like my prophet or my god's bodyguard because, I mean, she's just literally a troop. That's about it. Good HP. She is size 4, so she won't fit in well with the formation. Sure. Cool. Flavorful. Looking at our commander lineup, we have a really good commander lineup here, actually. We have a standard scout for 35 gold. I like these guys a lot. I like cheap scouts. I like scouts that we can recruit. Guaranteed. Really stinks when you have nations that either don't have scouts or they have expensive scouts for one reason or another. Quite nice. Next up, we have assassins. And again, I really like this assassin. For 80 gold, 4 resources, 1 recruitment. So you can get 2 of these guys per turn. They have Stealthy 65. That's pretty high. They have Assassin 1, so they're decent assassins, and Ambidextrous 2, so they're not taking a penalty on their attacks with their weapons. He's dual-wielding a short sword and a poison dagger. The poison dagger has a strong poison for 15 armor negating, but you do have to poke somebody first for that to take effect. Overall, I think this is a good assassin. He definitely can go in without gear and do work against most things. Now, if you're trying to kill a Muspelheim fire giant, yeah, he's not going to do that. But human troops, sure. Yeah, he can handle that. Some of the exotic stuff, if they're not like super, super defensive, 16 is a decent amount of damage. Even 13 is pretty good. And he has a smidgen of armor, so he might take one hit. I like these guys quite a bit. A group of, I don't know, 4 to 6 of these can clear out a province, and then just one of them can attack it and push the troops off. So you could even use a group of assassins to help you expand if you needed to do something weird. It's also nice if you poke a throne and you see just a ton of mages with a ton of gems. Maybe you could try assassinating a few of them out. I mean, if you had one less mage casting like illusionary warriors, that's going to greatly impact how hard a fight is, or hordes of skeletons, or etc., etc. So a very nice tool to have in your toolkit. Next up, we have the Centurion. This is our first leader. He's a good leader. He's 100, which gives you 3 squads with a +1 morale. He has a short sword. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't carry a shield for some reason, but he is wearing a legionary helmet and he's wearing a plate cuirass, so 14 on the body, 19 on the head. You could easily give him some kind of shield if you're worried about that. Of note, he's a 100 leadership leader that only costs 1 recruitment point. That's pretty darn good. These guys are totally usable. They're nice in the early game to help move troops around. We are kind of a troop army-based nation, so we are going to have to get reinforcements moved around, and maybe independent archers or something I used in a lot in the game behind us, or other interesting indie troops could be pretty useful. These guys are nice to go collect those up pretty efficiently. Next up, we have the Legatus Legionis. This is our better leader. 150 gold, 21 resources, 2 recruitment points. Totally fine. 150 leadership. So a +2 morale bonus for up to 4 squads. He is equipped, I believe, exactly the same. No, he's got slightly better armor. But yeah, very nice troop here. Again, you could just give him a shield. I don't think that would be wasted gems, frankly. Just to keep him... I mean, that would make him so hard to kill. That would make him so hard to kill, even with just a light shield. I don't think these guys are, like, thuggable or anything, but I think they are absolutely fine as troop leaders that aren't going to get sniped out by an imp or something relatively easily. Next up, we have the Acolyte. This guy, at first glance, looks like a really boring Priest Level 1 Sacred unit. However, he's only 65 gold, 1 resource, 1 recruitment point. Independent priests are 85 gold normally. So this is a 20 gold discount on a Holy One. Overall, I don't think Ermor really wants these guys, but if you were going to grab one to like build temples for you or something like that, they can only move 10 troops, which isn't particularly useful, but they're okay. I mean, I'll take a 20 gold discount over not having a 20 gold discount. Next up, we have the Bishop of the Sacred Shroud. This guy is a Priest Level 2, Sacred, he has Recuperation, and he is a healer. For only 155 gold and 2 recruitment points, this is pretty good. As a human-based infantry army, we like Sermons of Courage. That definitely just helps keep people honest and in the fight. Otherwise, good for banishing and things like that. In the game behind us here, I had a couple thrones that were really, really heavy undead, like 400 plus undead. So I got like 4 or 5 of these guys to supplement my army and just had them help banish enemy troops. And it worked out pretty well. And once combat's over, and you know, they've done what they can in combat, maybe even blessing troops if you don't want to get a Holy 3, they still have healer. So that is really, really nice for keeping your army healthy and on the move and not losing too many troops to wounds. It should be noted that because they are sacred, if you go with some kind of buff to help the protection, etc. for your sacreds, these guys will get it too, which actually makes them a little more defensive than their 0 protection otherwise looks. Next up, we have the Augur. These are pretty darn good mages. Fire 1, Astral 1. They have 9 research, and that's only for 72 gold a year, so we are above the efficiency mark. I usually say 10 gold for 1 research is about my measure stick on that. And they have Fortune Teller 10, which is pretty good. You certainly would love to have a few of these in every one of your forts to ensure that you don't get too many bad events, at least. Having Fortune Tellers also means you are tempted for taking Misfortune. And as we looked at with our heroes, they're nothing like stupendous, so I think Misfortune is on the table for scales for this nation. And don't let this dissuade you. This is actually pretty good battle pathing. With a Fire Gem, you could get up to Fire 2. You could Phoenix Power, and then you would be 2 Fire, 1 Astral. Or you could enter into Communions to support other casting. Pretty darn good here. Next up, we have the Augur Elder. First thing I noted about this guy, he is not cap only. He is slow to recruit, but not cap only. That's pretty good for a Fire 2, Astral 1, Death 2, with a 110% for Fire, Air, Astral, Death. So Skelly Spam is on the table here. Big fire things are on the table here. Some Fire, Air cross path, some Fire, Astral cross path, some Fire, Death cross path. Those are really, really good. And other than the Air, we are guaranteed to have at least those paths. So you're always going to get somebody useful. Some nations have kind of sort of similar mages, but there's like 1 or 2 good combos, and the others are kind of like, well, I don't know what to do with this guy. These guys are pretty darn good. Now, they are old age, which is very unfortunate. That means that they have high encumbrance here. 5 encumbrance is not great. And they're pretty old. They're only 46 for old age, and these guys are 60, so they're quite far into it. Map move -4. They are slow. They are noticeably slow at 12 map move. They also still have Fortune Teller. For efficiency, we get 17 research for 236, so we are not efficient. However, you're probably going to want these guys when you can afford them. They are slow to recruit, so you can't just pop them out instantly. You do kind of need them before... You do kind of need to recruit them before you need them. But I think this is a very respectable combat mage, and this cross-pathing has so many good things that you can do with it. And our augurs can join these guys in communions to do bigger things. So if you're doing that strategy, do remember that if you don't have the path as a communion slave, you get slamma-jammed with extra fatigue. So you may want to try to stick to astral or fire things while you're doing that. But that being said, if you have an emergency and you just need air shields, maybe you sacrifice some 90 gold augurs to get an air shield. You know, do what brings you to victory there. So quite like this. It's good having a battle mage. So I'd love to see this guy down at 2 recruitment points, but Ermor doesn't need it. This is fine. It is totally fine. Next up, we have the Perfectus Equitium. This is, I believe, a new unit. I don't remember this guy from 5. He is a priest level 1, sacred, recuperation, skilled rider 2, same as our sacred, essentially. Unfortunately, this guy has the same movement speed as our leader here. So you're not actually going to gain extra map move or anything by having this guy, unless you've taken something on your bless that it affects that. So a little superfluous here, perhaps, but it's fine. He's not like a terrible unit or anything if you want to use him. He does have 100 leadership, so it's not like he's bad. Next up, we have the Archbishop of the Sacred Shroud. Now, this is our cap-only leader. He is slow to recruit, 235 gold, but he is a recruitable Holy 3. That is incredibly powerful to have. It means every one of my armies could threaten thrones, and I can take the throne and claim it on the next turn. In a couple of the latest streams, I've kind of been like throne rushing, trying to win before bad things happen, and this is infinitely easier to do when you have recruitable Holy 3s. He does come in at old age, and he is relatively old at 96 out of 90, but he has recuperation and healer, so again, they'll stick around longer than you kind of think they would, because they'll generally keep themselves clear of afflictions that would lower HP and hasten their demise. So, very usable unit. Because he's the only cap-only unit, if you do have to get this guy, you can still get Augur Elder somewhere else. It's not like it's him or a mage, which is really, really nice. Somebody like early era Atlantis. They have recruitable Holy 3s, but they compete with a cap-only big boy mage. So it always hurts when you have to grab that Holy 3. We don't really have that pain here. It's totally fine. Finally, we have 2 more mages. These guys are kind of unique. This isn't a super common mechanic. They can only be recruited in non-fort provinces that have a lab and a temple. These are kind of the old faith, old cult guys. So we have the Flamen. This guy is a Fire 1 priest with a random of fire, air, water, earth, nature. So that's where a lot of those other paths that were mentioned come from. So as you can see, we're not going to be good at any of those particularly, but we have a smattering. You can site search, etc. If you get Fire 2, that's really nice. If you get Fire and Nature, you can Eagle Eyes. Fire and Air, you can True Shot. Fire, Water, I guess you could try something acidy. Fire and Earth, you can do a Magma Bolt. So pretty usable paths, actually. Like, Fire's a pretty splashable, usable combat path. It should be noted also that being sacred, they will get whatever bless that you have, which I don't think you go Mage Bless here because our augurs are not. But, I mean, if you had like some reinvigoration or something for your horses, I mean, it would still apply here at least. Research-wise, you get 9 for 74. So about the same efficiency ratio as the other guys. Do note, because you can't recruit them at forts, they're going to be slow to recruit. But that being said, you could build a lab and a temple in every province, and you could have that many of these every other turn. So pretty good, actually. Next up, we have the Pontifex. The Pontifex is kind of interesting. He's not a very good mage. He's only Fire 1 with no random. He's a priest level 2. The nice thing about this is our bishops are 155 gold, so this guy is 10 gold cheaper. Now, he is slow to recruit because, again, you can't get him at forts. But I think that's okay. I mean, you could definitely use a few of these guys if you wanted to, and maybe you want to not spend fort turns recruiting a Holy 2 that can't do anything else. And so this guy could, take a gem or a bottle of fire, go up to Fire 2 when he's not doing priest level stuff. That could be something. He also has a relatively new mechanic that was patched in a couple months ago called Grand Communicant. When you cast a ritual spell, if these guys are available, you can add your magic skill to the path of the ritual. That's for the purposes of how hard it is to dispel a ritual. So if you had 10 of these guys and the ritual costs 50 gems, you put 50 gems in, the ritual would count as if you had 60. I believe that's how that mechanic works. So, interesting enough, a slow to recruit Holy 2 is fine. They have fire, so they can do something once they're done with their Holy 2 stuff. They're okay. I wouldn't write home about these guys. It should, I guess, be noted that they're also efficient. 58 gold for 7 is fine. I think I like the other guys better, the Flamen, because they're better mages, just frankly. But these guys are fine if you want to use them. I don't think there's anything bad there. Who should you make your profit? That's actually a good question on this nation. One of your well-armored guys here would make a solid profit, but we can recruit Holy 3s, so it's worth thinking about profiting a Holy 3, because that will take him up to a Holy 4, and at Holy 4, you can do Fanaticism. Fanaticism is basically a map-wide Sermon of Courage. We also have that hero who is a priest level 4, going up to 5. I don't remember the name of it because it's so rare that you can cast it, but you do have that spell that raises the holy level of everybody else in combat. So let's say you were doing an Undead Throne and you had a Holy 5 guy, you could make like a bunch of your 2s into 3s, and that's pretty devastating to banishing demons and undead. So pretty darn nice there. National items and spells. We do not have any actual national items. However, we do have a national discount. Do I not have any? Here we go. This guy can look. I did not get construction in this game, unfortunately. We get a discount to the Shroud of the Battle Saint. So this is a construction 5 item. Normally it costs 5 astral pearls. I believe we take the cost down to 4. What this item does is it gives you 2 hit points. It auto blesses you. And what that means is, even if you're not sacred, you would become sacred. So maybe you do go Mage Bless and you give all of your Augur Elders a Shroud of the Battle Saint. It does give them a little bit of body protection. It gives them 2 more HP, and it makes them sacred with Bless. So very interesting there. I don't think this is nation defining for us. One strategy that people like to do is if you are high in death, you can do a high conjuration spell to summon in their Tartarans. They're these huge, like, Titan undead, but they're usually feeble-minded. Well, if you have recuperation or a way to heal on your Bless, you can give them Battle Shrouds and heal that off, and then you have a really strong caster that you can summon in. I don't think that's necessarily the play here on early era Ermor, but it is something to note. That is our only item. For national spells, we have one national spell. We have Contact Lar at Conjuration 5. We probably definitely go Conjuration 3. For Phoenix Power, we can do a couple of the different elementals that you can summon in. I think that's very solid there. But if we do go up to 5, we get the Lar. So only requires a Nature 1, which we can random into natively. 16 Nature Gems is not too bad. What do we get for that? We get a pretty decent mage, actually. So this is a Lar. They're like a rural nature spirit, like Greco-Roman. He has a water, an earth, 2 nature magic, 13 research, and as a summon, he has no upkeep. He is sacred, so he'll get your Bless. He's a magic being. He has poison resistance. He's ethereal and stealthy. He has recuperation and gives you a supply bonus because he's got that nature magic. He has spirit sight and he reduces unrest. So just an absolutely solid unit all around. And I think that's a good use of 16 nature gems. Because they are nature 2, they could craft themselves a Thistle Mace, and then you could do Strength of Gaia. So you could be up to a nature 4 on these guys with, some research and a little bit of effort, but not like terribly hard to do. Why would you care about that? Well, we could do like Barkskin. We could do Howl. With a few gems, you could do Relief. As a infantry type army, Relief is really good for you. And it helps out our old mages with Fatigue. I like these guys a lot. Do you go for Conjuration 5 as a rush target? Probably not. But yeah, I love nations that have summonable mages. That's a big strength that we can turn gems into mages. Not just units, but mages. And if you could get one of these guys, he can self-summon, so you can summon more with him. So all you need is that first Nature 1 guy. And even just from indies, you can probably find a Nature 1 in the early era. I think in the game behind me here, I had 2 or 3 sites that had nature mages that I could recruit if I wanted to. Pretty darn nice there. Otherwise, we don't have any other national magic. For other research targets, Ermor's kind of interesting. I like Alteration 3 for Body Ethereal. We have 90 gold augurs that are Fire 1, Astral 1. So when they go off script, they like to cast Body Ethereal. And Body Ethereal on your cavalry, or even just your line troops, makes them very solid troops. They already have pretty good protection, they have pretty good defense, and now it's a 50-50 whether you can hit them or not, just to begin with. So that's pretty nice for the augur to have. We already talked about Conjuration 3 for Phoenix Power and possibly doing some elementals. Do note that we have 3 fire income. So if you're like me and you like Distill Gold, we're a pretty good Distill Gold nation too. And getting that extra money in the early game can really help. Remember, we can build castles. So that's like, I believe it's 1,000 gold, 600 gold, 600 gold. So that is quite a lot of money to get that infrastructure up. And we also like to build lots of temples and labs, and we don't have any cost reductions to that. So early gold is very strong for Ermor. Next up, we have Evocation. We have a lot of good stuff here. We have Fire 2 guaranteed mages, so we could do Fireballs. We can get Fire 2 Air 1, so we could do Sulfur Haze. We can Phoenix Power up to 3. We could Flare, if that's useful. We have mages who can do Magma Bolts at 3. We have Shadow Bolt casters. We can Magic Duel relatively efficiently with our augurs. Here's where things get really interesting at 4. Netherbolt. I don't know if we've ever cast this on stream, but this is a very strong spell. So Astral 1, Death 1. It gives you a 35 range area of effect 1 with some extra precision It's only 15 fatigue, and it gives you an armor-piercing 20 plus magic damage, and it afflicts people with feeble-minded. The feeble-minded thing, unless you're hitting like a pretender, probably doesn't matter too much, but a 20 plus damage spell that's only 15 fatigue, that's pretty decent. We also have Banefire Dart. Banefire Dart is death and fire. It is even more precise at precision 4. For 20 fatigue, you get a 15 plus damage. So the plus means extra death gives us extra damage. And we get death 2 or 3s on our Elder Augurs. It's armor piercing, and it does area of effect decay. That's pretty darn strong. Note that none of this is actually fire damage either. So you can hit fire immune troops with this just fine. We can easily cast Falling Fires, praise Rex, with a communion, or we could even just roll fire 3s, not too bad. Up at 6, we get both Blast of Unlife, which I've never been too enamored with that one, but more importantly, we get Banefire. And again, we can roll death 3s that have a fire. So you can natively get this, or you could give a Skull Staff, or you could get into a little bit of a communion. Banefire is really strong. Range 45 plus. It's a fast casting spell. It's area of effect 1 with an extra precision. For 20 fatigue cost, it does 55 plus armor piercing damage. And in an area of effect 6, it gives you 8 more armor piercing damage. And that does a area of effect 12 decay, magic resist, negates. This is super strong. Even just out of the box, you could have a guy on turn 1 start casting this, and you could do 5 of these on script and he won't pass out. That is a lot of very strong damage. That's not counting adding in some communion support, or if you can raise the death higher. Remember, if we get to a death 4, this is only 10 fatigue cost. And in this case, that would increase our range and our damage. Very, very strong spell here. And we can get, they are slow to recruit, but they're from every fort. We can pull those guys out. And Evo 6 is not that hard to get to, especially because we have things we can cast on the way there. It's not like we don't do anything until 6. That's pretty darn good. If you go higher, at 7, we also get Nether Darts. This is similar to an earlier spell where if it hits you, it's an area of effect 1 Feeble Mind. The nice thing about this one is this is pretty easy to cast, and it does 15 plus darts. So you get a lot of these in the air. So 15 times 15 damage, in theory. Now, these are kind of one of those like shotgun-y type spells where they just end up going everywhere, but against clumps of troops, this is pretty good. 15 plus magic armor piercing damage. That's not bad. That is not bad. Construction-wise, if you want to go with the Shroud route, you need to get up to 5. Otherwise, we have Lars, which could make themselves Thistle Maces. We do have guys who could use a shield, so even just going like Construction 1 and getting those base unit items could be kind of good. Going 5 also would give us Skull Staves, which would be nice for some of those big death spells that we'd like to be able to cast, and other boosters. Could also be able to give us some good supply items. We do move a lot of troops around. I did have a little bit of a problem when I was grouping up for throne battles in my test game behind us here, and it would have been nice to have construction for a little bit of extra supply. Enchantment, I don't think I'm too intrigued with this. You do have the flaming arrows if you think that would be good for your slingers. Otherwise, I'm not particularly feeling that one. Thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy is important because at Thaumaturgy 1, it gives us our communions. It also gives us Decay and Frighten, which are pretty good death spells to be able to cast, and Dust to Dust can actually be pretty useful against undead. We also can do Bonds of Fire with our Fire 1 mages. That's less likely to kill your own troops with friendly fire because it's precision 3. They have to do a morale check 21, and they take 3 armor negating fire I believe it's every time they try to break out, whether they do or don't succeed. You also can do Battle Fury. We are a troop-based nation, so having the extra attack and morale is great. The extra attack helps you get repels. The extra morale helps you ignore repels and stay in the fight. Pretty good there. We do have a little bit of nature, so Some of the mount buffing things could be useful for your cavalry. Otherwise, not too much here. And we have no native blood, so unless you're doing something with your pretender, you're probably not getting into blood magic. Okay, so let's bring all of that together. So Ermor is a nation that has a solid lineup of troops with a good amount of variety. Most of these are usable, and they can respond to different threats. We have some giant killers, we have some anti-rush troops in the gladiators, we have pretty solid javelin, spear / sword line infantry. We have a really good repeller. We do have standards. We have some usable-ish cavalry and a usable sacred, especially if you solve the mounts protection problem. We have slingers, unfortunately, but we do have access to fire, which makes them usable if you want to go that route. We have really good leaders that are not squishy. We get assassins, we get scouts, we get I don't want to say a huge variety of mages, because we all kind of fall down into like, I do fire and death, and maybe I do that in a communion, but some variety with decent cross-pathing. So you can come up with some surprises on people, like maybe they're not expecting sulfur haze poison damage, or nether darts, which negates their fire immunity, or you do skelly spam just to be crazy. There's a lot of things that we can do here. Recruitable Holy 2s and 3s are also just really nice, especially the 3s. Like, I've really come to appreciate how nice it is to have multiple Holy 3s for throne claiming and for ease of getting blesses out. Even if we weren't using our sacreds, it's really nice to be able to bless all these guys with whatever blessing you have. I mean, every little bit helps, so that is quite nice. And just the smite spell, your regular just spammable spells, not terrible, and it's not super fatiguing, so these guys can actually do that pretty well despite their age handicap that they've got going on. Looking at the game behind us here, I was a little slow in expansion on this one. I had some weird mountain river things. I had to do a little weird backtracking, but it didn't really matter. I was pretty solid the whole way through. The hardest part for me was I had to keep like pausing for reinforcements to catch up to the frontier. Very Rome there. But it was nice. It was just a solid march forward, taking territory and getting these castles built. This is a very solid building. 45 administration essentially means that you get 45% of the income from the surrounding territories and 45% of their resources. So 2 castles, both pulling from the same spot, like right here, are going to pull almost all those resources out. And there's not going to be a lot of resources left for local recruitment. But you're pulling those over into your forts, where you're pulling in much better troops, usually. Should be noted, we start with that fortified city. So administration 50 here. The administration is higher for the fortified cities, which is rather nice. Good amount of supply, etc. Extra guards is nice. Good wall integrity. This is 600. Standard castle is 1,000, so it is better. But for a capital city, that's fine. I mean, you're already in a lot of trouble if you're getting sieged out in your capital. I didn't get as much infrastructure out. I got in an early war with Kailasa, and we were kind of raiding each other back and forth. He could just cover more land than I could. I couldn't split up too much. And so he burned down a couple temples I had built. I had one here, and I've rebuilt these, and yeah. So that was a little unfortunate. But otherwise, this was just an inevitable march of the legionary victory, essentially. Each army was in charge of a direction, and they would march out and take thrones. I fought Kailasa up here. I marched down here, was setting up for more thrones. Pretty darn good. Now, we are infantry based, so if I grab, that's not going to be a good example, like over here, these guys that have troops on them, we do not zip around this map very quickly. So in best case scenario, this is it. And that's because we have a grassland, farmland here. Otherwise, this would be a lot slower. So just know that we are not super mobile. And even if we just had our cavalry, we're still only map move 18, which isn't super high. Overall, very fun. Having the non-fort recruitables makes the map interesting, and it makes controlling your territory really important. You build nice big castles, which are easier to defend and give you lots of points for summoning in, well, recruiting lots of interesting units. Another interesting side effect I didn't think about, depending on your bless, Amazons are actually really nice for you because you can get another sacred cavalry that would basically like the same blesses that your cavalry would. So I had some Amazons here, which I did actually make a lot of use of. Most of this territory was fought for with that sacred, and my other sacreds were going into this war. And I think I had one more spot. Yeah, more Amazon. I just got this at the end. But I totally would have afforded that and got even more sacreds brought in. If you found Pegasus Riders, would also be another great one. Or I don't think the Nightmares are sacred. Maybe they are, but either way, extra sacreds are always appreciated. And because of our bless, if you go that route, they're very, very usable. Okay, let's take a look at Pretenders. Ermor has a pretty wide variety of choices. They have the Greco-Roman Titans. They have most of the standard monsters and the dragons, and a couple unique ones. For level 1s, they do have the gray one, which is a Trinity one. I've never actually played one of the Trinities, but essentially it splits their pathing up, and you get 3 gods at once. So can be super, super interesting if you want to try that route. Gives you more coverage, essentially. For immobiles, we have kind of the usual suspects. Notable, we don't have like Monolith or most of the idols, so that's different at least. I do want to call out our unique ones. We have Virtue. Now, 270 points is nothing to sniff at. And we already get +1 order on our scales, so that's not going to help. Neither will the Divine Emperor. But Virtue is kind of interesting. So he's got flying and 34 map moves. So he can zip around quite well. He's a combat caster. He has 25 invulnerability. 25, 26 is like the cusp of what I'm willing to put as combat gods. So he's there-ish. He does have fire resistance. He does have shock resistance. And he has off 5. That's one of the big things here. Off 5 plus that much invulnerability is going to keep him relatively safe. I think you probably pair this with a fear if you're going to go that route, and you do the slowly kill things off until they get scared and run. Fire and air are not the best paths for blessings for us. I don't know what I would make on it. Maybe awareness would be pretty good because you're going to have him needing to stand there and take a lot of attacks while he does that type of strategy. And then we like take some glamour so that we can get fear. Maybe he does have a Flambeau sword, big 2-hander. It's got the Holy Fire on it, which does 8 fire magic damage, which is armor piercing, and does 3 times versus undead and demons, and it's area effect 3 on that. So that's interesting. I think he is usable, but 270 points, man. That's a lot. That's a lot of scales. Conversely, we have the Divine Emperor, who is only 90 points. He comes in just Astral 1, but compared to a Dom 1, he's got Dom 2, so you can get to a higher Dominion score cheaper. And Astral's fine. You could do something with that. He also has the 10 new path cost, so he's not going to break the bank getting some other scales for you, or other paths for you. The Bulls can expand. The Draken, maybe. We would love a Forging guy like the Titan up here, or a Cyclops, but they're so expensive. I don't know about those. Prince of Death, he looks really cool, but he doesn't have invulnerability, so he can't fight. I guess you could rush some kind of death spell for him to cast, and he could help you expand. He does come in with 4d6 shadows at the beginning of combat, so maybe he leads a small force, and then he can, I don't know, hoard a skeleton or shadow blast or something from behind. I'm not entranced with this guy here. We do have the Great Archon. He's notable for being both an inspiring researcher +2, and we have relatively affordable researchers, so that could be something. And he has Alchemist 100, which means when you do the alchemy spells to convert gems into gold, I believe that doubles the amount. I think that's how that one works. So I mean, if only we could get that on a Dom 1, a Dom 1 chassis, I would totally take that. I have fallen in love with those gold spells for sure. I don't think we are a nation that needs a expander, but a fighting titan coming out at the end of year 1 would also just be another thing to tell people, hey, don't try to rush me. I've got gladiators and a god. You don't want any of this. And I think Titan of War and Wisdom is a decent one for something like that. She has fear built in. She has gear already started. So 17 with only a tiny bit of natural protection. So she could like Iron Skin, and that'll up that a few more points, maybe like 20-ish. But notable here, Enchanted Spear, a length 4 with 17 attack. So she's going to repel for days. And because she's fearing them, she's going to lower their morale, so they'll not likely be able to ignore the pokes. She also has an owl that attacks, which is a length 5, so it's not going to get repelled very well. I think she's usable. I definitely think she's usable. What would I take for the Bless? I don't know. Her incumbency is a smidgen high. I mean, Awe would work for her, and it would be okay on your Sacreds. Yeah, I don't know, but she is definitely usable. You could definitely do that. Let's take a look at a couple that I did make, and one of which is one of her. And let's see what some of those thoughts were. Let's start with her, in fact. So this one is a bit of a mage bless. So it's got precision 1, it's got reinvigoration, and it's got arcane finesse. So this is going to be looking at making battle shrouds for your elder augurs, so that you can get those magic resistant penetration and the reinvig on there. We're going to be throwing some really, really nasty spells, and you don't like getting hit with those, so that's why I went with the extra precision. Yeah, she's okay. She's fine. Little low on this, but you know, when she's out, she will be giving you an extra temple check. The scales are okay, if not great here. I think that's okay. I wasn't in love with this. I didn't like this test game. Next up, we have The Last Emperor. This was an attempt at an imprisoned. So we've got Spirit Sight. Spirit Sight's really interesting because we do have the Fire Astral Crosspath. So we can do Solar Eclipse, which means that we'd have darkness on the battlefield. So if you wanted to give your Sacreds and your Mages Spirit Sight so that they could ignore that, and it would help them against Glamour units, I took 5 Undying and Enchanted Blood just to keep those Sacreds alive a little bit. And I went with Poison Weapons. I tried another build that had Stygian Skin and Poison Weapons. It didn't quite do it. Ironically enough, the Sacreds were too killy for Poison. I didn't hardly ever see anything live long enough for the Poison to tick. But Poison Weapons is interesting because it's not an incarnate weapon bless. So you can get this out even on an imprisoned guy. He does bring in a lot more magic variety if you can get to the point that he comes in. But otherwise, I didn't find him particularly interesting. Next up, I have Living Relic of the Martyr, our favorite bone boy. Although at least here it feels like it's loreful because we have the body of the prophet. And this one I really like. This is what I was using in that test game behind us. Stygian Flesh is really good. It solves the problem of protection for your mounts on your Sacreds. I believe this plus their armor gives them 16 protection on their body and 10 on their head. That's enough. This is very, very similar to the Pegasus buff that we took with Arcus of Folly. There we went with Blood Surge, but here I went with Enchanted Blood. The Warhorses only have 6 magic protection. That's notable. That's really bad. This takes it up to 7, which is still bad, but the extra regen was enough to not have that high of attrition on my guys, especially when I did lose the mount. Because of the heavy, heavy armor of the rider, just that little bit of regen was usually enough that I don't know if I lost more than 5 or 6 guys all game. I did have some that would lose their mount, and I would have to re-recruit them at the capital, but I wasn't having Sacreds die, and the Enchanted Blood did seem to do that. It has the bonus of any of our casters that get this, it helps out quite a bit there too. The Stygian Flesh gives them just 10 invulnerability. We don't have a lot of pathing, to give ourselves protection on mages, so that's rather nice. And the Enchanted Blood, just nice to keep them safe. They took an arrow and didn't die. I guess I should also say that our Sacreds have recuperation, and so you don't end up with all of your horses limp and crippled and dying on the march. And this is enough that they were living pretty well. I was happy enough. So I think that goes to show that I think for a good cavalry unit, 10 protection's kind of the minimum. And 16 is pretty decent. Somewhere in that neighborhood. He also gives you maybe the option of some Blood Death crosspaths if you went really late into the game. I don't think you'll probably do that in most Ermor games, but yeah, it was all right. He can make hammers too. If you do want to do shrouds, that takes your shroud cost even lower. I believe that's down to like 2 gems. Or if you just want to make a couple shields or whatever, it's nice to have. It's very nice to have. Another thought would maybe be trying to get some Astral instead, and that would let you make crystal gear, or whatever they call it now, where we could do the auto communion stuff, and or we could do Astral buffing of pathing. Because our Astral's really low, so you're not really going to be able to easily cast something like Anti-Magic. You're going to have to communion up before you could cast that. So, the Living Relic of the Martyr, I quite like this guy. This worked really well, and it's something kind of sort of different than what I've done before, so I enjoyed that. I do think there's lots of room on Ermor, though. We could totally ignore the Sacreds, I think, and go with much heavier Scales Bless. So if we wanted just to look at Scales, I mean, you could do pretty good on that. Heat 1's not that big of a penalty for you, and it helps if you do end up using any of your lizard troops or if you get Amazon Sacreds. So I think that's relatively interesting there. This is a lot of scales. That's a lot of income. And we have castles, so we have really high base income to then increase with our scales. So I wouldn't pick her for this. I would pick somebody cheaper. But just for example, like something like this would be very good. We have lots of efficient researchers. We have some magic resist spells that we like to throw out, and this also lowers the fatigue cost of spellcasting, which would help our old guys out. I think Scales is definitely viable here. So share your thoughts on that. I'm really interested, as usual, to see what other people have come up with, especially things that use the Sacreds. I do kind of want to use the Sacreds to finish out the era here. I think they're pretty cool, and they're tied to the Middle Age Sacreds, so another reason that I'd like to use them. Overall, very decent selection of gods, I would say. Okay, so in conclusion, Ermor is a really cool, really fun nation. I do think that, ironically enough, this is a nation a lot of new players play if they start in the early age, because they see this and they're like, oh, okay, it's Rome. Like, you can just understand it. And it's a good one. Like, most of these troops are not super redundant. Like, TNG has that issue where it's like, the same guy 3 times with very little variation. There's a little of that, but not too bad. We have some very usable mages, which are fun to use. We get Holy 3s and Holy 2s, which is cool. We get assassins. We get good leaders. Overall, a very fun nation, I would say. I'm very glad I saved it for last for early era. I think it's going to be a good one to finish us up. And we'll see where we go into middle era. That is going to be crazy. Just for anyone who's still hanging around here, do note we have a whole nother list of nations to do. And we still have late age with a whole nother list of nations to do. So we are just getting started, builders. We got a long way to go. Speaking of a long way to go, if you haven't left a like on the video, please do. That helps it get shared to more people. If you haven't subscribed before, I hope today was the day that I've earned your subscription. And if you'd like to support the channel more, super thanks are open. If you come and hang out on the streams, super chats are always appreciated. And maybe check out the member join button. If you join as a member, you get access to the pregame videos early. I try to at least have one up at all times early on. That may fluctuate up or down a little bit, but it's just a nice bonus for you guys. I can get some early feedback. You can watch those and have more time before the stream takes place. And it helps the channel out a ton. Last month was the highest stats we had on the channel. Everything was up except for the money that YouTube was giving me for the effort. That was far, far down. And because of the members who have joined, we were up in members. It was not the worst month we had. So thank you very much to those of you who have joined as a member. And if you haven't, maybe check that out. It's really appreciated. Either way, I hope to see you on stream. This is going to be a fun one, guys. It's going to be the end of an era. Okay, take care, builders, and go out there and build something cool.